track on the ongoing important discussion, actually. I think it's the first time we are talking in Saudi Arabia in this way. Actually, when discussing whether the use of the death penalty in Saudi Arabia could amount as a crime against humanity, it's a legal question, is whether the way of the death penalty is used forms part of widespread or systemic attack against civilian population carried out as a state policy as required under Article 7 of the Rome Statute. In the Saudi context, I believe the available evidences make this a legitimate legal question that deserves serious consideration. Since 2015, Saudi Arabia has carried out more than 2,000 executions, according to the documentation of the European Saudi Organization for Human Rights. 356 people were executed in 2025 alone. It is the highest annual figure ever recorded. More than half of all the executions carried out since 2015 were for offenses that do not meet the international law threshold for the most serious crimes, particularly drug-related offenses. But also, as you have been mentioning, crimes against humanity is not measured by numbers alone. The key question is whether these violations reflect a systemic pattern carried out as a state policy. The same practices have been repeated for years. We have witnessed that across different regions of the country and through the same security and judicial institutions. This goes for beyond isolated mistakes or individual misdiscounts. It points to an institutional pattern implemented by state authorities. This is particularly evident in the role of the Specialized Criminal Court, which for years have been the main judicial form used to prosecute political opponents, human rights defenders, members of Shia community, in cases linked to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. The repeated due process violation in these cases reinforce the conclusion that we are looking at a state policy rather than isolated incidents. Over many years also, we have documented violations of the right to life and fair trial guarantees, including torture to obtain confessions, denial of remote access to lawyers, or also incommunicado detention, trials that fail to meet the basic for fair trial standards. Interpretation also for foreign defendants were not given, executions following proceedings that fall well below international standards. We have also documented the continued sentencing and execution of people for offenses illegally committed while they were children, despite Saudi Arabia's obligations under the Convention on the Right of Child. Another pattern that we have documented concerns foreign nationals who now make up a significant proportion of those sentenced to death and executed in Saudi Arabia. In 2025 alone, more than half of those executed were foreign nationals. Our documentations and interviews with Ethiopian, Egyptians, Somalis, and other migrant defendants reveal a recurring pattern of inadequate legal representation, lack of interpretation, inability to participate effectively in their own defense, executions carried out without prior notification to their families, and withholding over their bodies after executions. Article 7 of the Rome Statute identifies a number of underlying acts that may constitute crimes against humanity when committed as part of widespread or systemic attack against civilian population. In the Saudi context, we have documented conduct corresponding to several of these acts, including torture, arbitrary detention, prosecution of members of the Shia community, discriminatory denial of fair trial rights for foreign nationals, and murder, finally at the end murder, where executions become the final stage of this pattern. Viewed in this way, an execution is not an isolated event, as I have been saying. It is the final step in a chain that begins with arbitrary arrest, continues during the trial, and ends with the killing under the authority of law. Of course, Saudi Arabia is not a state party of Rome Statute, but the purpose of this analysis is to argue is to assess whether the documentation pattern meet the legal elements of crimes against humanity and should inform international accountability efforts. Nor also this analysis challenge the civilian right of states to administer criminal justice. However, international law is very clear. This can't be used to shield widespread or systemic attack carried out through state institutions. This is particularly relevant in Saudi Arabia because although death sentences are formally issued by courts, they can't be carried out without approval from the king himself, Mohammed bin Salman, or his authorized representative, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. In practice, so the final decision to execute remains a decision taken at the highest level of the state rather than being judicial outcome. Taken over number of executions and the pattern of serious violations and the impact of the groups, particular group, and the role of the judicial and executive authorities raises a legitimate legal question as to whether the Saudi practices should be element of crimes against humanity, and we believe this discussion is putting this legally in the way. And thank you.
Well, may I ask you this follow-up question? From your research work, the classification of crimes against humanity, would that be extended to its application in the case of Saudi Arabia, particularly when you mentioned, for example, systematic execution of foreign nationals? Is there a case to be made that crimes against humanity are being conducted as it is?
Yes, actually, I think the pattern and the numbers and the documentation that we have been doing for the cases that shows even though that the killing and the not serious crimes, the torture that they have been subjected to, and the numbers and the nationalities and the no legal support for them, all of this can be taken as really a crime against humanity and should be conducted, and more investigation should be done, of course, but it is the base that we can see that this is systemic violations, and it is widespread, as we were saying, and it is conducting for specific people, the migrant workers and the foreign nationals in particular.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now we turn our attention to Ethan. And Ethan, you're going to talk about the situation